As I promised you in the presentation on developing your papers, I'm going to do a really short presentation on how to format short quotes. There are three ways to format short quotes. Remember that a short quote is one or more complete sentences in your paper, but it's less than 4 lines of text as you type it into your paper. And there are three ways to format it, and it depends on where you place the attributive as to how you format it. An attributive is just the statement that identifies the speaker or the writer of the quote, such as Reagan said, Bloom writes, the First Amendment states, that kind of thing. And in quotes with introductory clauses or phrases or more than one sentence, the attributive can be at the beginning, the end, or within the quote. And we're going to learn how to format each of those because the formatting changes slightly depending on where the attributive is. Let's look first at how to format a short quote that has the attributive at the beginning. And we're going to use the paragraph that we used in the Developing Your Papers video about Reagan's little joke. Okay, take a second to read this again. Now what we have here is a summary from an article that appeared on the front page of the New York Times on August 12, 1984. And within it, there is a direct quote. And in this case, the direct quote has the attributive at the beginning. And this is how it's formatted. And the formatting has to do with how it's punctuated. It begins with the attributive, which in this case is Reagan said, then there's a comma. And of course, there's a space. Then you have your open quotation marks. Then you have your entire quote. And then at the end, there is no period. And you have your close quotation marks. Then you have the citation for the quote. And the period that ends that sentence comes after the citation. It doesn't go inside the quotation marks, it comes after the citation. The period always comes after the citation instead of at the end of the sentence that is completed by the citation. And that's true in a quote as well as for a citation for a summary or paraphrase. So, just to summarize, if you had the attributive at the beginning, you had the attributive, a comma, open quotation marks, your direct quote, no period at the end, close quotation marks, your citation, and then the period. Okay, here's how you format the same short quote if you put the attributive at the end. It's the same paragraph. So we end the sentence before the quote. Then we have open quotation marks. We have our entire quote, and it closes with a comma and close quotation marks. Then we have our attributive, which in this case is Reagan said. Then we have our citation, and then we have the period. So, if the attributive comes at the end, you have open quotation marks, begin with a capital letter, your complete quote, then a comma, then quotation marks, then your attributive, then the citation, then a period. Now, if you have a short quote and you want to put the attributive between sentences within the quote, here's how it's formatted. And again, it's the same paragraph. The quote begins here, and we have 2 sentences in this quote. The first one, and so we open with quotation marks. We have the first sentence of our quote, We end that sentence with a comma. We close the quotation marks. Then we have our attributive and then a period. Then we have open quotation marks. We begin our sentence with a capital letter because what comes after it is a complete sentence. At the end of the last sentence of the quote, you don't have any punctuation except for the closing quotation marks. Then you have the citation and then the period. Okay? So it's open quotation marks, capital letter. The sentences up until you want the attributive. The sentence before the attributive has a comma instead of a period, close quotation marks, the attributive, then a period. Then if the rest of the quote begins with a complete sentence, you have open quotation marks, capital letter, and then the last sentence for the rest of the quote, you don't have any closing punctuation, you just have the last words and the closing quotation marks, then the attributive, then the period. And finally, you can format a sentence with a short quote that has an attributive actually within the sentence. And simply for the sake of demonstration, I took out the beginning of the quote where Reagan says, "My fellow Americans," because I think it makes demonstrating what I need to demonstrate to teach you this a little bit easier. So other than that change, here's the same paragraph. And we have the paragraph leading up to the quotation. Then we have open quotation marks. Then we have the first part of our quote. "I'm pleased to tell you today." Then we have a comma, whether there's actually a comma in the actual source or not. We have, let me start that again. We have open quotation marks, the first part of our quote, a comma, close quotation marks, our attributive, and a comma because the sentence goes on within the quote. We're not starting a new sentence in the quote. So then we have open quotation marks and a small letter, unless of course the word is I or a proper noun that is always capitalized. Right? Then we have the rest of our quote, and as usual at the end of our quote we don't have any closing punctuation. We do have closing quotation marks. Then we have our citation, and then we have a period. Let me go over that again. Okay. Open quotation marks. First part of the first sentence of the quote. Comma. Close quotation marks. Attributive. Comma. Open quotation marks. The rest of the first sentence of the quote, and it does not begin with a capital letter. Then we finish our quote. The last sentence doesn't have any closing punctuation, but it does have closing quotation marks. Then we have our citation, then a period. You might need to go through this a couple of times and make a list of the rules. The rules also are on the Purdue OWL, on the sections on formatting quotations. And the writing centers on any of the campuses, and Smart Thinking, which is the tutorial service that you can actually access through Canvas, can also help you with this. Of course, you can also always email me a copy of a quote you're using and ask me if you're punctuating and formatting it correctly. Okay? And as usual, if you have any questions about this or anything else in the course, just drop me an email from an account other than Canvas to deborah.okie@csn.edu. Sorry about that. Okay. Hope this little presentation helps you understand how to format short quotes. We are going to have a presentation shortly on how to set up MLA paper format in Microsoft Word and how to format long quotes.